See, back in the 1960s, people used to try to find themselves. Like, they would climb the Himalayan mountains to see if they could discover who they were, to try to discover their identity. But the truth is that it's in finding God that we discover who we are. Today's feast, Epiphany, means manifestation. And God manifests himself. He reveals himself. And we find him. The Magi, the kings, they find him. And once we learn who he is, we know who we are because we're made in his image and likeness. We are his reflection in the world. The better we know who he is, the better we know who we are. To find him is to discover our identity. Like I said, I'm made in his image. And that's what the Feast of Epiphany is about, to discover who he is more and more. He is always revealing himself to us in a deeper way. And once we discover who he is, we fall down in adoration. That's what the Magi did. They prostrated themselves before the mystery of the Christ child. They adored him. Once we know him, we love him. And finally, we serve him. They bring their gifts before him, their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We bring him our talents, everything we have, our treasures, and surrender it to his will. Okay? Actually, that's the old Baltimore Catechism number 1 question. Why did God make me? God made me to know him, to love him, to serve him in this life, and to be happy with him forever in the next. And heaven is just the full epiphany of God, God fully revealing himself. We call it the beatific vision. But not everyone shares the same idea of embracing Christ. Like, there are many who, like Herod, have this dread of Christ. They have a great deal to lose when Christ is revealed, and they'll do everything in their power to resist him. Cruel King Herod represents all the powers that stand against Christ. And these powers are not just outside of ourselves, but they lurk within all of us. They are parts of ourselves that want nothing to do with Christ and jealously guard their independence from the incursion of his will. Herod took the kingship of Christ seriously and sought to kill the Christ child. We say he was deeply disturbed by this news. Hostility to Christ did not die with Herod. There are still those who would try to destroy Christ in our midst today. They see him as a threat to their ideas, their power, their way of life. We could see it in the Middle East, where Christians are, they call it a Christian genocide in the Middle East. The Chinese government has for almost 60 years tried to eradicate Christianity from the country. If Christians do not bow first to the state as God, they see it as an affront. Okay? We say God is above the state, okay? But many would reverse that. In northern India, fundamentalist Hindus attack and kill Christians. Even the peace-working Sisters of Mother Teresa. In the Sudan, the Muslim government would bomb, government of Khartoum bombs Catholic schools while they're in session and sends out assassins to attack Christians on their way to church. We saw it in Germany with Hitler. We saw it in Russia with Stalin. We saw it in Mexico in the 1920s. We saw it in Spain in the 1930s. Even in our midst today, Sean O'Malley, the Cardinal of Boston, says, being a Catholic in Boston is a contact sport. And we can see the intrusion of government, the so-called presidential HHS mandate is trying to oblige Catholics and other religious believers to go against their consciences and pay for contraceptives and abortifacients like the morning after pill. The truth is, only God has the authority to command a person's conscience. If any human being were to try to command another person's conscience, they would have a distorted image of their authority. The mandate, so-called mandate, is more accurately called a dictate, such as dictators give who assume power to issue orders regardless of people's sacredness of conscience. And there are many false claims to kingship, such as that mandate. Even in our midst, the government wants us to acknowledge a redefinition of marriage. The former Cardinal of Chicago, Cardinal George, says the nature of marriage is not even a religious question. Marriage comes from nature. The state protects the good of marriage because it's essential to the common good of society. But the church nor the state invented marriage, and neither can change it. The truth is, it's part of the common sense of the human race. It was true before either the church or state existed. It will continue to be true when there's no state of Illinois and no United States of America. A proposal to change this truth about marriage and civil law is less a threat to religion than it is an affront to human reason and the common good of society. It means we are all to pretend and accept something we know is impossible. He says the legislator might just as well repeal the law of gravity. And another reaction is indifference to the Christ child. Pope Francis speaks of the globalization of indifference. And Pope Benedict XVI says that the world is increasingly globalized. And he remarked that while globalization has made us all neighbors, it has not made us all brothers. It is the church that is universal, Catholic. Epiphany, they came from all the corners of the world to bring into this communion of truth and charity. Okay, it's the church that seeks to unite peoples in this communion from every race, language, and culture that must teach the world how to live as brothers and sisters. And like we say, it's the the mystery of Epiphany is that God is ever more revealing himself, manifesting himself to us. We are ever more coming to know him, coming to love him. The more he reveals himself, the more we find him and the more we find our own identity. And from knowing proceeds love, and from love proceeds service. So to enter into the mystery of Epiphany is to strive to ever more surrender our gifts, our minds, our hearts, our wills, to ever more perfectly fall down in adoration before the mystery of Christ, to serve him with all our minds, hearts, souls, and strengths is to celebrate the Feast of Epiphany.